So as I said, this is the Advancing Racial Equity Collection Development Grant informational webinar. To get us started today, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about who Indiana Humanities is and what we do before I turn it over to introductions with the staff members that join me today. So for an agenda, kind of look at what we'll go over today. We will be talking about obviously who we are, and then we'll give an overview of these, we call them informally, I'm sure we'll all slip up today, ARE grants. That's what we informally call them. Otherwise, it's a little bit of a mouthful. So we'll give you kind of an overview of the grant. We'll talk about the book list that is part of the grant process. We'll give some details about how to apply and take a brief look at the project director guidelines. And then we'll end by talking about the timeline you can expect for this grant. As we go through things today, we really do want to answer questions. So you can either put those in the chat or in the Q&A, and one of us will grab those and answer them, hopefully in the moment, but certainly at the end. Yeah, so I encourage you to use those two functions of Zoom as you have questions when we go through things today. So if you don't know Indiana Humanities, we are a statewide nonprofit, and we say that our mission is simple. We encourage Hoosiers to read, think, and talk, and we do that in a variety of ways. One way is with our programming. We do develop and host our own programs. And you might be familiar with long-running Indiana Humanities programs like the Novel Conversations Lending Library for book clubs, or other kind of in-person programs about like Next Indiana Campfires, which engages Hoosiers with their environments through literature. So we run all sorts of programs ourselves, and we encourage people all over the state to get together and talk about humanities disciplines like history, literature, and ethics. Things to know about us, we are statewide, so we try to be in every corner of the state at some time in a given year. And we're also nationally funded. So we are your local partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And so lots of people don't know that every state has a humanities council that does this kind of work, that gives grants and provides programs. So I encourage you to check out indianahumanities.org to learn more about our work generally. And then kind of getting down into what we wanted to talk about today, the Advancing Racial Equity Collection Development Grant is a special opportunity that's funded generously by Lilly Endowment, Inc. Just as another note about where this funding comes from and who's made it possible to give this grant. I do want to take a second to have the staff on the call introduce themselves. So I'll kick us off. I'm Megan Teligman. I'm Director of Programs at Indiana Humanities. I've been on staff about 5 years now, and typically I work with all of our actual programming. So in-person things, we have a whole nother arm of grants funding, but this is really a hybrid programs grants opportunity at Indiana Humanities. So I help manage this program. Bronwyn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. I am Bronwyn Carlisle, and I am Programs and Special Projects Manager at Indiana Humanities. Have been here about 6 years. You may recognize my name if you've ever used our Novel Conversations Lending Library. I've been deeply involved with that. And then kind of just generally work on our more literary programming. And I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Blair. I'm a program associate here at Indiana Humanities. I've been here almost a year, and I'm one of the main contacts for this program. So if you're emailing, you'll probably end up getting a response from me. Yeah, we're excited to talk about this project.
Thanks, folks. So we're going to get into the meat of the presentation about the Advancing Racial Equity Collection Development Grants now. So I'm going to turn it over to Bronwyn.
Absolutely. So we just want to share a little bit of context about how these grants came about before we get into the nuts and bolts of what it is like to apply for them and the timeline and all of that. So this first slide here gives you an overview of the history of this program. So the Advancing Racial Equity Collection Development Grants were first introduced in 2020, and they came about in response to the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing protests And kind of following that, libraries across the nation were experiencing long wait times for popular titles related to racial equity. And so the Lilly Endowment, through this process, had been working with the Indianapolis Public Library to address those wait lists and set up with them a way to increase purchasing in that collecting area for the NDPL branches. And as they were in that process, they thought, well, how can we make this statewide? So they approached us as a statewide organization, and we set up this grant process of $1,000 mini grants so that collecting organizations throughout the state of Indiana could use a pre-approved list of books to apply and select the books that would be best in their collections to kind of shorten those wait lists. And so that was a very popular grant in 2020. We saw a huge response to that. And it really, as I mentioned, was designed to kind of address that increased demand for materials in this collecting area. And so I'm now going to show you a map here that tells you a little bit about the grant recipients from the last time around. So as I said, we had a huge response throughout the state. You can see widespread geography here of the different organizations that applied. 167 different organizations applied, and we were able to award 150 of those. You can see a breakdown of organization type here, plenty of school libraries, public libraries, colleges and universities, community organizations, and prisons. So most recipients of this grant are libraries. We require that the organizations have a circulating collection. So that's why you see those types of organizations here. And then below, awarded in 85 different communities, and more than 8,000 different materials were purchased through that initial round of the grant. And so for 2022, we are able again to award 150 grants. As I mentioned, they are up to $1,000 mini grants. And using those $1,000, the funds can be used to purchase materials from a pre-approved book list. And Lindsay is going to go into the nuts and bolts of that book list here in a second, so you know what that's like. And then again, as I mentioned, this grant really is designed for circulating collections, not for one-time giveaways or just to have the books to, sit in a shelf and be used by one person, but really designed for libraries. And so I'm now going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk a little bit more about the book list.
Thank you. All right, so to get started, the book list itself has titles that address the topics of race, systematic racism, and the Black experience in Indiana and beyond. It includes fiction and nonfiction titles in 3 main categories: children, teen/young adults, and adults. And the book list was first curated by librarians with input from humanities scholars in 2020. And then it was recently updated once again with the help of librarians and humanities scholars to include titles published in the past 2 years, along with more titles of Indiana interest. And on the next slide, we have a little more information. So there's a little over 400 titles available on this book list. And as applicants, you have the freedom to choose any title or titles on that list to add to your collection. I also want to note that there is no specific version, edition, or format of a title that you have to purchase. So the book list sometimes does have a specific edition listed, but you don't have to get that particular edition if you don't want to. Similarly with format, any format you want that works for your collection is all right with us in terms of purchasing it. So for a book, it could be a printed book, it could be an ebook, it could be an audio book, etc. For films, it could be a DVD, a Blu-ray, a digital download. Also, I want to note that there is no specific vendor that you have to purchase your materials from. We, of course, would recommend going with a local vendor if and when possible, but it is not required. And then a final note I want to make, because I have received some questions on it, is titles that are not on this pre-approved book list cannot be purchased with ARE CD funds. So I just want to make that note. And we can move on to the next section about how to apply, and I'll start with eligibility. So as Bronwyn said, this grant is open to public libraries with circulating collections, including but not limited to schools, colleges, and universities and prisons. It's also open to nonprofit organizations at large. If you are not a library, however, your application must describe how the ARECD materials will circulate for free in your community. And then another note, once again, another question I have received, and so I want to share, is that applicants and/or recipients of the 2020 ARECD grants are eligible to apply for this 2022 grant cycle. So if you are eligible and interested in applying, the application process, you're going to visit this website that's on the screen, indianahumanities.org/grant/equity. Review the book list. The book list is available on the website as a Excel spreadsheet as well as a PDF. And then you're going to complete the 2022 ARECD application form. Also on the website is actually a link to an external WUFU form. So that'll be the application. And before you submit the application, please make sure to attach your proposed book list budget and narrative describing how the funds will be spent. And just a little bit more on the budget, please be as specific as possible. So let us know what title or titles you're interested in purchasing. Let us know the number of copies of a particular title you are interested in purchasing, and also the estimated cost of a title. And I do want to note that our book list does not include a price list because, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a specific vendor you have to purchase your books from. And of course, vendors have different pricing. So you are going to have to look into the cost of each book yourself, but hopefully it's not too much of an issue. And as in terms of dates, the applications are due Friday, June 24, 2022 by 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And then all applicants will be noted whether they have been awarded or rejected by Friday, July 29, 2022. And so I will pass it over to Megan for the next portion.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. There's a question in the chat that says, can circulation be amongst our staff? We are certainly open to providing support for like resource libraries at, organizations or companies. If you don't already have some kind of circulating collection or resource library in the application process, you'll just want to clarify, how you'll guarantee that they continue in circulation. The goal is that, the books just aren't used for giveaways or something like that, but that they continue to circulate over time and are available to as many people as possible. And Courtney, if you have additional information or questions about that, please feel free to reach out to any one of us and we can help answer that. Okay, so looking at the project director guidelines, so these are available on the website now, and I encourage anyone to, if you're ever applying to a grant from Indiana Humanities, the project director guidelines are one of the best ways you can prepare for the application. So I encourage you to look them over before you apply, even though they're designed as a resource to help you, through the grants management process as well. So if we look at two of the big things that are in those project director guidelines are kind of the requirements of the grants and then resources and recommendations. And so as I noted earlier, this funding comes from Lilly, but we are still a federal funder, and with that comes some various requirements. One of these, which is fairly new as of this year, as a federal re-grantor, we need all of our subrecipients or grantees to have what's called a unique entity ID or a UEI number that's given through sam.gov. So I just wanted to flag that now. While you do not have to have that number to apply, you will need it before you can receive funds. So it's just a note that you should look into that UEI number before you apply and make sure it's something that your organization would be eligible for. And the project director guidelines go into detail there about where you can go find out how to register for a number. And then you can also reach out to us if you have questions about that. But I did want to flag it as kind of a new requirement of our grantees that we'll need to have before we can send out any funding. And then Kelly has a question about the UEI number. Would an individual library have a UEI, or would be there one for the entire college? good question. The entire college would suffice. So the UEI number needs to match the organization on the grant agreement. That's what I'll say. So it's a question of, do you want the college listed on your grant agreement, or do you want your individual library listed on the grant agreement? And that would determine like who needs the UEI. Happy to talk through that because I know this can get really confusing. But yeah, Kelly, if you want to reach out to any one of us, we can advise more on that process. If you already receive federal funding, it's very likely that you already have a UEI number. So schools and colleges are likely to have already gone through this process because they are recipients of federal funding. All right, so that is one nitty gritty thing that needs to happen. Again, I just want to reiterate, another requirement is that the materials are purchased using a proposed book list budget. So you'll see that when you apply for the grant, you'll set a kind of idea of what you want to buy and what the possible budget would be. I will make a note about budgeting for this grant. We know that the budgets that you submit in the application are estimates because book prices change frequently. So if you buy all the books that you proposed in your initial budget and you still have money left over at the end, we don't want that money back. We just say, buy more books from the list. Another requirement of the grant is that you acknowledge Indiana Humanities and the Lilly Endowment support in the communications materials. In the project director guidelines, the way that you can describe that support is spelled out really clearly. And then also we make available spine labels that you can request or print yourself. So if you want to acknowledge the support of Lilly and Indiana Humanities visibly in the collection, we do have that resource available for you if you're awarded the grant. Again, another kind of best practice in grant management is that you're documenting all your project expenses and keeping records for at least 3 years. We don't need the receipts, but it's always possible that anyone can get audited. And so the best practice is to keep those records for at least 3 years in case anybody were to come asking for anything. And then finally, there's a brief final report that we ask for that's due 90 days from the project's end date. So those are the requirements that are listed in the project director guidelines. And then also in the project director guidelines, we have some recommendations too, and some resources you can refer to. So a few of these just kind of high level suggestions include, kind of making the most of getting this grant. So we saw with the first round of grants, some grantees that, really use the collection to communicate about, receiving the grants and having these new resources available. So we encourage you to spread the word that you received an ARECD grant through resources provided. So we'll give social media graphics, like I said, spine labels, we'll have a poster template, things like that, where you can make the most of this exciting opportunity. And then also within the project director guidelines, we have some suggestions for how you might program around these books. This is a piece of this project that we hope to develop more in the future, but we do include some ideas for public programming connected to the book list as well, including author talks, book discussions, displays and exhibits, or film screenings, story times for younger readers, etc. So in addition to all the nitty gritty requirements in the project director guidelines, we also have some recommendations for how to make the most of this opportunity. And the full copy of the guidelines, like I said, is at indianahumanities.org/grant/equity. While they are a guide to get you through the grants management process, they are also, like I said, a great thing to read before you apply, because I think it helps clarify various aspects of the process. All right, and now we are on to timeline. And I believe that I'm handing it back over to Lindsay.
Yes, thank you, Megan. All right, so as I said earlier, applications are due June 24th, 2022 by 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and all applicants will be notified with whether they have been awarded or rejected by July 29, 2022. If you do end up being a grant recipient, you have until December 31st, 2022 to use 100% of your grant funds. As Megan said, please don't send any money back to us. If you have extra money, purchase additional materials from that book list. And then lastly, also, as Megan said, the final report is due by March 31st, 2023. As Megan said, information about what's required for that final report is available in the project director guidelines. And so the last slide is just reaching out to us. As we said, we are here to take your questions and help you out throughout the entire process. So we look forward to hearing from you and hope you get a lot out of this grant.
Thanks, Lindsay. So we have plenty of time for questions, and we've got 2 in the Q&A now that I'll just go ahead and address. So it looks like we have a library. However, I would like to apply for the cultural center that's for students, faculty, staff, and the community. The center has bookshelves, books, magazines. I think, Georgina, this sounds like a circulating collection to me. Like I said, if there's any question about like the books going out and coming back, just clarify in your application, you know, how you would guarantee that the books would continue to be available to the community over a period of time. But it certainly sounds like what you have described here is likely eligible. Happy to have a conversation anytime if you want to talk through it. All right, so got that one. And then our next question is, does the acknowledgement need to be on each item or title, like a book plate? We do not require that. We make resources available. So if you want to request those spine labels from us, or if you want to use the various graphics we provide to create something like that, you're welcome to, but it does not need to be on every title. We just ask that, you know, if you make an announcement about the collection, or if you put a sign up about the collection, you acknowledge the support of Indiana Humanities and Lilly Endowment. All right, other questions for us? I'd also welcome to, if there are any previous recipients of the ARE grant on the webinar today, please feel free to let us know, and you know, put any comments in the chat that you think might be helpful for new applicants. Shipping costs included in the budget. Yes, I think that would be just fine. That is actually a great question, Michelle. And yes, that would be fine. All right, Penny asked, does it lower our chance of receiving a grant if we are a single school where the circulation may be lower? Not at all, Penny. I think we're very, the idea for this grant is that it's highly accessible, that, you know, we're reaching as many people as possible, and we don't ask for any kind of circulation stats in the application. Obviously, we're interested about collecting that information afterwards, but it does not affect your chances anyway, the size of your organization. All right, Sally asks, can library shelf ready processing be included in the grant? That's a great question. I'm going to tag Bronwyn in on this one. Bronwyn, to what extent did we allow kind of those processing costs to be included in the budget?
Last time around, we kept it mostly to the books themselves. I will say the final budget does allow you to kind of list any in-kind or cost sharing that happens. And so I think last time around we had people that was mostly shown through the cost sharing on that final budget.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I would just thank you, Bronwyn, for refreshing my memory too. Sally, I just kind of want to, before I say yes or no to that, know kind of how much it would be. So if you want to reach out to us and talk through it, I think that might be the best way. Technically, the funding has to be used primarily for the purchase of books. So I just want to get a better sense of what would be involved there. Thanks for that. Very good question. All right, well, Bronwyn and Lindsay and I will stick around if there are other questions, but I again encourage you to check out those project director guidelines because they are your best guide to, kind of knowing what's involved in the grant process. And then also, I really do encourage folks to spend time with the book list. A lot of thought went into it, and there are just so many amazing titles on that, and it's expanded quite a bit since our last grant round as well. And so I do encourage you, if you have the time, to look through that book list and research some of the titles because it's a pretty wonderful list. All right, Bronwyn, Lindsay, anything else you want to add as we close things out here?
No, just don't hesitate to reach out to any of us with any questions. We're happy to help.
Same. Thank you for attending.
All right. Thanks, everybody.